Thank you very much. Ooh, very powerful. Thank you very much for having me. I am going to talk about data-driven personas at Salesforce. I don't actually have a clock up here. Somebody feel like giving me a 10-minute warning? Somebody in the front row? Oh, somebody's there. I got somebody giving me a, great, perfect. So data-driven personas. The idea behind this particular talk is that when I attended ConveyUX a couple of years ago, when we did our feedback survey, complained, I thought constructively, to Joe Linsky that I didn't see a lot of case studies from user research, and I wasn't seeing sort of examples. And he, whenever you open your mouth, he came back and he was like, great, come back and give us a case study and talk about the work you're doing and provide actual examples from the work that you do. And luckily enough, Salesforce is the type of company that I have some latitude to share information about the work that we do. So this is going to be an example of that. If there are questions, I have a set presentation, obviously, that I'm going to share, but if you have questions while I'm going about it, please raise your hand and ask. Don't feel like you have to save them till the end. Okay, great. So my name's Nalini Kotamraju. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm a UX leader at Salesforce, and sometimes I gesture earnestly, as you can see from this picture, which was a surprise to me. What is Salesforce? So the reason I usually include something like this, and I had this experience at the speed dating table already, is people nod and they're like, Salesforce, yes. And then you're like, what does Salesforce do? And they're like, no idea. So I just want to talk a little bit about what we do. And it's less of a sales pitch around what Salesforce is, but part of this illustration will be to show you the complexity of the environment in which we're trying to create personas. So in the beginning, there was CRM, customer relationship management software. And in the beginning, you had a person, that's a salesperson on your left, and that person basically had a Rolodex, right? And the customer relationship part was how do I manage addresses and phone numbers and now email addresses and that kind of information. That's been going on a really long time, right? That's just about Rolodexes. And when Salesforce entered the market about 16 years ago, their innovation was to take all of that information that had been traditionally stored in mainframes and in large sort of desktop environments and make it available online in the cloud. So that's why there's a cloud around Salesforce. That was its sort of disruptive part in customer relationship management. So why does CRM matter? Like why does something that understandably sound incredibly boring, like your address book, matter so much to companies? So Forrester's take on this, that if you're a large company of any sort, even a small company, you're using your CRM system at the base of your whole customer experience strategy. Unless you know who your people are, much less what they're buying, what they're doing, you don't know who your entire constituency is. So that's part of the reason it matters. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides that are a little bit, they look very marketing. And again, I don't see them as marketing as much as a way to illustrate the ecosystem. So here you have what Salesforce would say is the age of the customer. Some of you have probably heard that rhetoric, not at Salesforce, just in general. And originally, Salesforce started as just technology that salespeople would use to track their sales. So think of it as you're a company, you get all sorts of people interested in buying, right? They come to your website, they signed up for a newsletter, you can tell from their cookies that you're looking for a car because you've been to 4 different car websites, et cetera. And then they want to target you to sell you something. That starts here in the sort of guided sales section. What's happened with CRM is that it's expanded to all these other arenas that not only Salesforce, but also competitors have expanded to as well. So you might buy something, and then you might make a call to customer support because you're having a problem with it. So that call center technology, the software that the call center agents use, is now potentially Salesforce. We know what you've owned, what you own already. We see what you're interested in. A company could use, not we Salesforce, a company could use that information to market to you predictively, right? They might use Salesforce technology for that. And then as that circle completes, you can see the sort of way that it builds on this idea of just having addresses and phone numbers and email addresses in a database to building a whole ecosystem of customers connecting to their end customers. Land. For the more technically inclined of you, we call this our marketecture slide. I don't take it out. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just really quick, are you talking specifically about known customers?
Okay, so the question was, are you talking specifically about known customers? So we sell to State Farm, right? Is that what you mean, like who's in the database?
Right, because
Yeah.
you can find out a lot about your users anonymously, right, and put them into clusters.
Yes.
Without knowing exactly who they are, as opposed to somebody that has already kind of made a connection with you and agreed to have a relationship with you.
So Salesforce provides the technologies for companies to do both, right? So we're not tracking this, like we could care less, but like we could sort of care less. But if you're a company like Adidas, right, you may know who some of your people are by name, but you may know anonymized information that you've purchased from some third-party vendor about people who are interested. What Salesforce does is provide a company like Adidas or any other of our customers the technology to process that in the sales or track call center. So it provides like the underlying infrastructure. Okay. So this architecture side, the reason I mention it is I'm going to be talking today solely about the leftmost circle, our sales software, which is our most popular software. But this gives you a sense of scope, right? And why this is important is when we were thinking about personas, we were ready to like fall on the floor and curl up into a fetal position and say, how are we ever going to get traction with all of these users who use these completely different products? So we decided, of course, to start with the first one, right? Sales, our flagship product, and then expand outwards. This is just a screenshot so you get a sense when I'm talking about the sort of CRM software, you just get a sense there's a desktop, there's a dashboard. On the right, there's sort of a Kanban board, from manufacturing metaphor, you're tracking sales through a process, just to give you a flavor. So it got us to the question, as I said, how do we understand Salesforce users? And I should also note that one of the challenges, like you can take a large-scale consumer company like Google, right? And they have many, many, many users. But when they're coming to Google, they're doing one thing, right? So when you're thinking about how do I take this vast universe and make smaller, manageable chunks out of it, it's a little bit easier. In our enterprise space, we have smaller numbers of people, but they're coming to do very different types of tasks to our software, depending on a bunch of variables. Industry size, how large their organization is, whether they're a payroll accountant or a call center worker, a range of issues. And that became, for us, a problem, right? We couldn't have 1,000 personas to represent our user base. We needed to represent them, but represent them in a manageable kind of way. So let's talk a little about personas. So what we all know about personas, right? I don't have to review personas for this crew, but just as a reminder, like it keeps users at the center, it anchors tasks, right? It becomes the I in the statement. We try and think of them also as the user and user stories if you're using any sort of agile informed development method. A lot of people would argue that one of the benefits of a persona process is that you're aligning the organization to think about our users in a sort of common language. The familiar creating empathy. We also know that they're time consuming to create. Anyone who's been part of a full-scale persona effort takes a lot of energy. And they often quickly become stale, right? It's often people worry like, is there updated? Is this still relevant? It's been 3 months. Can we still think about this person as an actual user of our product? And this is what we heard when I first arrived at Salesforce a couple of years ago. I started, poking around. You ask questions, you have coffees with lots of people, and I asked them and said personas, and somebody said personas. We have some somewhere. I think there's a site. They're old now. I don't know. Maybe somebody in marketing knows. There used to be some posters in the scrum rooms, which I went hunting down. We don't need personas. No one in T&P, which is our R&D, will use them. It's kind of a waste. So this is sort of the atmosphere when I entered Salesforce that what existed around personas. Not promising, but what we thought as a team we could do is rethink the idea of persona for our purposes, because we were really clear that Salesforce needed to have a tool to which to think about our users rather than Salesforce user, who could be anything in this sort of enterprise space. So this is what we decided we wanted for our personas. We wanted 3 things. We wanted stability. The personas we were after, they needed to be stable. We just did not have the wherewithal, given the size of the company, the number of products, the acquisitions we do, the relatively small size of our team, to constantly be iterating. So the personas had to be meaningful, but they had to share some stable kind of characteristics, so it wasn't that every time we released a new feature, we completely had to rethink the model. We wanted them to be used broadly, so not just by the designers, but by the entire organization, the doc writers, the engineers and engineering leads, the PMs, our product marketing managers, so not corporate marketing, but people focused on the product. We wanted them to be useful broadly. And then modularity. So as I showed you in the crazy slide with like the layer cake of all the levels, like we wanted something that, okay, once we'd done one product's personas, we wanted to be able to fit in somehow with the other ones, as well as with the other data sources, right? We're a large company. There are plenty of other people in the company gathering data. So we wanted to make sure that what we collected would fit into whatever market research was doing, whatever our data science team was doing. So we wanted to be modular and create our personas in such a way that we would have common enough touch points that it would be like a puzzle piece that we could fit in with the other data sources as they became available in the company. So what we did. First thing we did is we conducted a large-scale survey. So this, again, is just for our sales product, our first product. We surveyed a couple of 100,000 people, and we asked them how much time they spend on a number of core sales tasks on an average day. We focused on what they do in their job, not just in Salesforce. And I mention that because it might seem really obvious, but this is one of the things that was actually quite a bit of organizational contention. So the organization was very focused on which features are everyone using. You can imagine how this discussion goes, right? You're talking to a PM and they're like, but are they using feature X? Because I own feature X and I want to know who's using it. And we had to do a lot of discussion around, well, they're using feature X to accomplish a task, to get to a goal. So while we're going to ask whether they use feature X, maybe our real impetus is on that goal and on that task. So that was that was a friction point. And then here's some idea of the questions we ask. People often ask, like, what kinds of things do you ask? So these are very typical kind of questions for someone in the sales cycle. So how many accounts are in your territory, your geographical territory? How long have you worked in sales? How many people report to you? How do you get new leads and contacts to follow up on? And then on the average day, how much time do you spend doing the following? So within the sales process, there's an inordinate amount of time just double checking accuracy of email addresses or making sure the person's still employed at the company that they said it was in the database. Lots of, until you know the sales process in detail, like there's an incredible amount of manual, tedious work to be done. So we wanted to measure that and figure out what they were doing. So we ran a very exciting factor analysis on this reported behavior. So we took all the responses, and then we factored, particularly on those core sales tasks, to come up with segments, basically. Those of you who've done some sort of market research, like this is a fairly common technique to come up with segments and buckets of people. And I am, not to be a tease, but I am at the end of this going to show you the actual personas we came up with. But I'm just going to talk about the process a little bit. So we ran this study, collected reported behavior. And then we incorporated product usage data. So as I mentioned before, data science didn't sit in our team, right? That's a separate team in the organization. But they are actually the ones who have purview over the data about what people are actually doing in the product, which is a subset of what we're interested in. So what we did is partner with them and say, hey, we have all of this data in aggregate about what people say they do for their jobs. And we can make we can infer some things, right? If you say a large part, you're spending 4 hours a day running reports in Salesforce, we know that means you're using particular features. So if we were to look at our data in general, not for those individuals, but in aggregate and say, how much time are people spending using this feature, we could see what the match is. Right? It's the age-old question, right, of reported behavior versus observed behavior. People say they're doing one thing, and they're actually doing something else. And so we partnered with our data science team to sort of validate people's reported behaviors. Interestingly enough, the fit was pretty close. Like perhaps it says something about my level of cynicism, thought there'd be a really huge delta between what people said they did and what they're actually doing in the product. But it was a closer fit than we thought. So it sort of strayed through to our original factored personas.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
If there was a big data, a delta, what would you do? Would you just say, well, we got to throw out all that data, or would there be something else to be learned by people saying they're doing something that they're not doing?
So the question was, if there had been a big delta between what people said they were doing and what they were actually doing in the product, what would we have done? Would we have thrown it out? No. Data's good. Data properly interpreted is even better. I don't think it's a matter of throwing it out. I think at one point I said, if there's a big delta, that means that we should start thinking about that perceptual difference, right? If you think you're spending 4 hours a day running a report, but we can see in the usage data you're only doing it 2 hours a day, then something's wrong, quote unquote. And that would have, I think, opened up a whole area of interesting things, right? We see this in all other sort of social science examples, that gap, like how many phone calls you think you make, or whatever, how many texts you send a day and how many you actually do. The number's pretty big. So I think there would have been plenty of lessons to learn. We were just lucky in this instance there weren't. And I also just, it's a little bit of a side note, but I also think it has to do with the nature of the work. Like the example I used about like everything in the communication sphere, right? There's some famous studies about like 10 years ago about like number of emails, and like nobody could tell you how many emails they sent. But pretty much somebody can tell you how many cases they solved in a call center because you're getting paid for it, right? So the nature of the work of our software tends to be in areas where people are pretty attenuated to what they're doing. So partnering with our data science team. We visited our customers. So once we had these segments, we did what one should do and went out and talked to people. So we went on site visits. We did sort of traditional ethnographically informed work where we took our designers, we invited doc writers, engineers, some of our QA folks, and we visited our customers. And we did lots of interviews, lots and lots of interviews, just great. And we videoed them. For all the headache that this project might have been, probably the thing for which my team was most grateful was that we had some professional videographers, but even more so, we tapped people internally who were willing and had skills around taking video and invited them to come on visits. And often they were designers, but sometimes there were people, somebody in like facilities and real estate management in our company, so someone who's not like core to the customer, but happened to be like an amateur videographer. So we invited him to come on a visit. So there's was plenty of opportunity to invite people, but also to provide a way to capture data that we knew would be useful later visually. Rather than what classically happens is where the researcher is sort of scrambling and has like one camera and is taking a picture and trying to take notes and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So robust set of customer site visits. In that, we didn't say, oh, we want to talk to a particular profile. We asked for particular titles and asked, hey, who's the person who does the most reporting, right? Because report creation turned out to be an important persona. And then did interviews, familiar to you. And then the last thing we did is we invested in the persona I'm sorry, could you say it louder?
Why did you guys decide to do the customer visits following the survey?
Yep, so the question is, why did we do the customer visits after the survey? Pretty classic question, right? Like, do you do the qualitative work first and then the quantitative work, or do you do the quantitative work and then the qualitative work? I think in this instance, it had a lot to do with the stuff that were doing. The quantitative one was about behaviors that we already had some inkling about. I think if this had been a brand new space, we might have done it differently and done a whole lot of exploratory work first and then come up with questions, done a survey, and gone back out into the field. But there was a lot of internal knowledge about what happens in using this sales product. So we were able to leverage some of that. Interestingly enough, though, you'll see you won't see here, but it did come up in some of our product areas. We miss things. We miss things that, like, oh, we had no idea, that came up in some of the customer site visits, and then when we refresh them in a while, we'll include it. But for the most part, we were a pretty good fit. But that was the rationale. Okay. Investing in the persona process. I think, like, all right, so I've talked about the factor analysis, we get on a plane, we go visit our customers, et cetera. I think this is actually the reason that we had success within the company around this. We invested in it. I have someone on my team, Kai Nunez, and we call her the persona tsarina. And why we do that is basically early on in the process, we decided we needed one person in charge of the personas. And interestingly, in our broader UX team, I had an offer of sort of a UX project manager, someone who does our recruiting, another sort of more project management focused. And I said, I actually need a domain expert. So we made the choice for this effort to take part of her time, and she basically shepherded the process. She did it for our sales personas, for our subsequent product personas. She was able to carry over the learnings. Like the first time we did the sales persona effort, it was clumsy and there were inefficiencies and we screwed up. And she was able to take all of that learning, and when we did our service product personas, like we cleaned up all of that. It also meant that she was a central person who had a lot more time to pay attention to the details than I did, that people within the company could go to for questions, right? If there were any questions around the persona effort, I could be like, go talk to Kai. And because she was a researcher by training and by craft, what that also meant is if someone wanted someone internally to come talk about our persona effort, I could send her. In a way that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to send my UX PM, because she could talk about the factor analysis that we've done, she could talk about the domain, she knows the products, and she could serve as a partner to the other sort of domain research experts as well. So that was an incredibly important part of I think, internally the success of the project. We created traditional persona assets. This is more familiar, right? We created, on the left is sort of a card with a binder clip that we can put personas in and out. We had a website. And so now let's talk just really briefly about the personas. So we came up with 5 major types of sales users. Sales leaders, deal closers, data expert, pipeline builders, and trusted advisors. So one of the things that's interesting about what we've called them, as I'm sure you can imagine, the creation of personas, the data collection, the analysis, legal, all that kind of stuff is a process in of itself. But the other part of the process that's challenging is getting executive buy-in, right? Like getting the company to support the effort of what you're doing. And another sort of thing I think we stumbled in luckily with our first product that we did, in trying to convince the sort of GM of the product about this effort, we said, well, we'll come to you with the buckets, with these different segments and personas, and you can name them. And this settled so many worries, right? Unbeknownst to us, the executive, not to make light like the executive's not a dodo, but he just sort of felt like he wanted to be able to sign off on something about the process and able to control how we talked internally about our personas. So it sounds like super small, but like naming rights made a lot of difference to the success of them. And this is sort of a mapping of how some of those core sales tasks we talk about match to the personas. We talked about primary job function, secondary job function, that's measured in terms of time. And you can see sort of what people are doing. One of the reasons this slide is particularly important internally is, okay, all right, we have these buckets, right? What someone, though, who's designing a particular feature, regardless of their role on the Scrum team, can do is look at this and say, like, oh, I'm really thinking about something to improve our forecasting features, right? We have 2 or 3 features related to forecasting. They can say, okay, that's not applicable to absolutely everyone who uses our Sales Cloud product. It's really only applicable to people who consider themselves data experts. And they're not dealing with reps, sales reps at all. And they're not like maintaining relationships or outward facing. It gave them a way to focus in on particular smaller groups of people. Could someone give me a time check? What time it is? Perfect. All right, the challenges and debates. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the challenges. I sort of alluded that like this was a success project. We were super happy. But there were actually a couple of heated topics that are worth talking about, I think will be interesting and probably resonate with some of your experiences. The first was these really personas? Was what we created really a persona? I mean, there are 2 components to this that I think are interesting. One is people who are trained in a sort of classic method around personas have a very different methodology than what I described, right? And I've done it, I'm sure you've done it as well. We think about creating personas. We might do interviews, we might do 5, we might do 20 if we've got a lot of budget or time. We do qualitative interviews, and then we craft personas that we then usually target to designers to play a role in a larger and longer design and development process. Often just design process and not even just the development part, right? But often just that first part, if you think of Peter Meerholz's diamond, like that first kind of diamond. What we built wasn't really that. So we experienced a fair amount of pushback internally within the UX team, within my researchers, within broader people around like, why go through this approach, right? Like, why can't we do sort of like the initial exploratory work, come up with these buckets and call it a day? We could have done that, absolutely, and I think that would have had some strength in the design process. But if you go back to our idea of stability, one of the things that we wanted to do with these personas, make them stable, and one of the ways to make them stable is to ground them in as much data as possible. So that was sort of the argument around why we took such a data-intensive or data-driven approach. The other sort of way that we thought of these as representations of people was to think about the ways in which the modularity that we plug in with other data. What we've done with this data, for example, is like we have these 5 personas, persona names in sales. So right now in our development tools, when you write a story, a user story, like in a sort of agile process, we're changing that system so that you actually have to indicate which one of these personas or all of the personas you're writing for, right? So we really had a lot vested in being able to make super strong, aggressive claims that these are our users. And it's just harder to do with 20 people that you've interviewed. And it's much easier to do with a large-scale survey of reported data combined with the interviews and visits, combined with product usage data, to push for that sort of person, user, human-driven kind of design and development process on a really large scale. The second debate that was interesting, and the person I mentioned before, Kai, and I probably had the biggest clashes around this, is whether they should be represented, like clearly we did the icons on the right, or as people, or as sort of caricatures of people. Very heated debate. And it's interesting, I think I lost and won the debate, right? So in one instance, we've gone with the right side, right, where we've used icons. And I had a whole very complicated rationale for this, right? Like I wanted to start thinking about, and Salesforce is committed to this as well, like thinking about roles independent of demographics, right? Thinking about it neutrally, not always gendering or nationalizing or aging particular roles. And I thought, well, one way to do that is not to assign faces to it, right? So you don't have the typical X person who has this X role in a company. What of course promptly happened is as soon as we released these particular personas, everyone, designers, PMs, were like, great, we're going with the title of deal closer, and here's a face that I found off the interweb that we're associating with it. It begs another sort of larger question about the role of personas or the way to meaningfully think of our users and buckets, and this sort of what I was missing in the creating empathy and the sort of pursuit of data and neutrality was opposite to what some of the people wanted. I mean, to be fair, organizationally, we want both as a large company, right? We want the empirical groundedness in data, but we also want the human connection part. And then they're probably more, sort of our next round will go about this a little better, but it was the argument about how to represent the personas turned into be a very fundamental question about like, what are we building these things for? And how are you going to use them in the organization? Our persona approach, though really great, and I love it, neglects emerging personas. So as you remember, the first thing we did is we actually surveyed customers and users about what they did. What that means is we missed everything that was like a small n or just emerging. So for example, we acquired a really small field service line of business, right? So think of like your cable installation person or anyone who's like going to someone's home or residence to do something, and we're providing that software. Like we barely had any of those users at the time we ran this, but it's important in our design and development process because right now we're in that space. So it became really quickly to us that we had to provide like a complementary emerging personas that we think exist but aren't actually grounded in data, which is a sort of tricky line to walk. But that's something that's a lesson learned that we sort of stepped up to solve. And then communicating the value of data behind the personas. So the gentleman's question is, why not just use roles instead of the word personas?
Job title.
Okay, so super great question. Job titles is easier to tackle, and then I'll do roles. Job titles, thank you. One of the most interesting things about job titles is that the map between job titles and what people do, there was none. Crazy town. Like, everyone's an account executive. Like, their job title, like, it was a completely unreliable measure. Part of the reason I'm so excited about that, it's one of the things the stakeholders, like, didn't believe. Like, we would keep running these tables that would show, here are the titles, and here's what they do. And they're like, there's no match. And we're like, yes, it's called people in the world. So, job titles, no. Roles we consider, the tricky part is that because it's this type of enterprise software, the word role in the Salesforce environment has a very specific meaning. I have this also at Microsoft in the same sort of enterprise space. Your role internally, like at Salesforce, means the part of the product and the data you can see. So if I started talking about blah, blah, blah role, they'd be like, oh, but can they see these components and this kind of data? So we had to throw that one out. I mean, really what these are, I was joking earlier to Len, that like these are like behavioral segments with qualitative data layered on top, but that's not very catchy. And personas seemed like a little more manageable. And the last thing is the communicating the value of data behind personas. So the other person who was incredibly instrumental in this is Alyssa Vincent-Hill, somebody else on my team who did a lot of the quantitative work behind this. And inevitably, when she would go present, someone would say like, okay, I see those 5. But I don't think that person does that at all. And Alyssa would say like, would nod, but because they were used to personas that were either marketing personas or based on smaller ends, there was this instinct to put all the personas up for debate. And for some of that we wanted, right? Like part of it was like, let's think about, like we wanted the productive part of persona creation where you sort of think about the edges and you think about how we're bucketing. But in this particular example, the person said, well, I think there's a whole other group of people who are using this particular tool within the sales world. And the answer was like, no, they're not, because we asked and they didn't pick it. And it was really hard for some of our stakeholders to hear that. They were just convinced that this was something they could argue about. And our discussions, I mean, of course, this can come from a very data-informed way. You can say, like, there might be some reason that in our sampling method, we missed those people, right? Like the same way we missed the emerging personas. Like there are many data collection reasons that we could miss someone, but like I feel that this is wrong, and the persona should look differently, was something we heard quite often and was enough to like make us run screaming from the room. And that was really interesting. I think that's actually, again, a tension between the traditional sort of persona creation where the value, at least of the design team, is in the discussion around it, where these are a little bit more baked. So there is discussion, but it's based on a lot of data. And there can be mistakes about what you measure. And like, as I said, we might have missed some variables or some questions to ask. But when we've asked the question and people have said no, it's very hard to argue. Particularly at the numbers we were sort of luckily able to garner, which, hundreds of thousands of people we contacted, and then really decent response rates. Yes?
Looking back, do you think you would have maybe brought them in as you're developing the persona? So using the research, of course, but...
The question is, looking back, would I have brought them in to developing the personas? So what I've glossed, I have a different version of this talk that's more about the organizational part. So we did in each of the sort of product areas incredibly collaboratively. So we didn't sit and come up with the questions. We actually had the PMs and the doc writers, and we went to the engineering town halls and said, like, here are the things we're thinking of asking. What are we missing? So we over-rotated, I think, on inclusiveness in the beginning. I think it's just, I'm sure there's some philosophical statement to be made about the reality of some forms of data and people still thinking their opinion matters. It's sort of like if any of you have taught in a classroom and you're talking about something and there's a fact that's pretty empirical, like this many people died, and someone's like, I don't think that's true, or I don't believe that. And you're like, It's not a matter of belief. It could be a matter of poor data collection, it could be a matter of many things, but belief is not one of them. And that's, I think, the challenge. I think that's going to change as we all culturally get much more data fluent and data literate. But it was definitely something we saw a lot of, and not surprisingly, not from our engineers, but a lot from our designers and some of our PMs. Yes, back there and then in front. And that's my last slide, so we're open for questions.
Kind of on that same note, how did you negotiate?
Great, so let's start with that. So the question is, how did we negotiate the differentiation between like some of the things are primary and secondary, and some of them are in more than one places? What's really nice about the approach that we took focusing on tasks is these aren't features. So these are really tasks that people do, and you could do them with a variety of features. So no one's really vested in saying, like, I own everything, right? If you're the person who happens to be in charge of forecasting and reporting, you're like, cool, I got 2 personas who are interested in my space. So there wasn't a lot of competition that way. Does that address that question? Okay.
Somewhat, yeah.
Try me again.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think,
Yeah?
yeah, go ahead.
And did you have a second question?
Well, essentially,
It's a comment, yeah. So the question was like this difference between like stakeholders or maybe executives who like, how do they interpret the data and the tension between that and the actual data. I would say, if I had to think about, I'm making it up number-wise, which is bad in my position, but like, I would say for every 20% of work we did actually collecting and analyzing data, we did 80% of stakeholder management and dissemination and distribution. Doing the work, like, I mean, you can run factor analysis and run some regressions in a couple of days. But that work can only, and I think it's super important when we think about this and our users, this isn't like a tax. That isn't horrible work. This is great work, right? Like, this is the fun part of it, where you're actually in a discussion with someone who's like, I don't really get that. I thought everybody used this tool, or I thought everybody was running reports all the time. And you're like, not everybody. And then we can talk about, like, why do we think that? Well, we're getting these many complaints about it, or we hear from these customers more often. So it takes a lot of time, but it's all about the conversation. So even in this instance where our data is pretty firm, it's still all about the conversation. And then you had a question. Yeah. Great question. So the question is, especially in the B2B, the business to business, or the enterprise space, you often have users who are in different size organizations, right? They're like 20,000 or they're 10 people. The question was, how did you account for the variety, the variance in tasks that might happen, right? Like, so it doesn't matter, we factored the tasks and we relied a little bit on sort of our knowledge of what people did. What you saw varied by organization size is perhaps what the distribution of these personas looked like, right? And this is sort of where it varies a little bit. So somebody might be doing more than one task at a big company, but it's not their whole job. So, I mean, the sort of statistical answer is basically we are pretty sure that the tasks we captured our original span, but the variance that comes by organizational size might be in frequency or might be in distribution of the personas, but not in the tasks themselves. People might wear many hats in a smaller company, but we still capture the tasks. Over here and then to here.
You talked about quantitative.
Yeah. So the question was, in this collection of quantitative versus qualitative, like, how did we really marry the data, right? Like, we saw what people reported, and then we actually went out and saw them doing it. I would say that for better, or I don't want to discount the sort of innate knowledge and the customer site visits we'd done beforehand that led us to those core tasks. So I think that's one answer to qualitative data. Like, I've talked just about the customer site visits, but we conduct hundreds of studies a year watching people do stuff, and that also informed the tasks, which is part of it. I would say the customer site visits were less about let's change the categories. They might have sort of highlighted some things. Like, for example, we took notes, and someone might say, like, hey, we didn't see a lot of this, or this person mentioned that. So I wouldn't say like the qualitative data, like the customer site visits version, like fundamentally transformed the behavioral segments or the reported behavior segments, but they were incredibly important in communicating it outwardly and to making it real. Like, what I didn't talk about here is we created videos that we showed internally. I can't show them here because every company, Bank of America didn't want us looking at their screens or at their business. So that's all pretty locked down. But that's what I would say. It's qualitative in the front for the tasks, and at the post-survey part of it, it was more to provide, I don't want to say flavor, that sounds really derogatory. I don't mean it that way, but sort of context for the actual segments. There and then there.
So I think you just partially.
Great question. So the question was from someone who does a lot of qualitative work in her own role and is figuring out was curious about how we use them. So one of the things that we've just started now is we've gone on all these site visits and we have all of these interviews and we've gotten them transcribed. And so one of the things we're doing is actual text analysis on the transcripts. It's not as fancy or as expensive as it sounds. I mean, I know I work for a big company now that has some resources, but not everyone does, certainly. So that's one way that we're trying to approach it, but we're trying to take a really systematic approach. So the other thing that we're doing is we've taken all of the responses, both in the survey, right? So we had like standard question and open text, plus the transcripts, and we've made that internally available in one of our systems, so that we're just at the point of doing that for one of our products. So that means that if you are a PM in a certain space, you'll be able to access that, let's say, a content management system, to see both the interview transcripts and the free text, open text answers from the surveys. But we're just starting that process. You, and then you, and then you. Yeah.
So I was wondering if when you were doing the representatives.
So the question was, the people we actually ended up visiting, the companies, were those the people who answered the survey? Some yes, some no. Honestly, our biggest challenge is access to our customers, because we're coming in to private spaces where they run their business. I think I had you. Oh, I think we're done. I'm here the rest of the day and through tomorrow, so please come. Feel free to ask questions or email me. Thanks.